Kevin Murphy, man, thank you so much for joining us here on Machine Heads. How you doing today, man?
Doing great, Wayne. Thanks for having me.
No problem. Thanks for coming in. So, you represent Blue Diamond, and today we're going to be talking about auger attachments for CTLs and skid steers. And I kind of wanted to start with a quick overview of the auger itself, kind of as an attachment and its use on skid steers and CTLs. And kind of like this first question is really kind of examining, in you guys' mind, what kind of jobs or applications are really best served by pairing an auger specifically to a CTL or skid steer. There's just so many, with the compact equipment segment in general has just grown so much over the last 10 to 15 years. And there are so many different machines that are good at being tool carriers, right? And so I just kind of wanted to start this off with getting in the right space of kind of like what jobs are we typically talking about when we're thinking about, pairing an auger to a skid steer or a CTL.
For sure. An auger is one of those very versatile tools, whether it's a fence contractor or a contractor looking to put in, foundations, or somebody looking to dig holes, put trees, a landscaper. Skid steer is a very good tool carrier to carry that auger around and put it to work. You got a pretty wide variety of different size and style auger bits you can use and a lot of different ground conditions and applications. The skid steer is one of those things that's very quick to move around a job site. It's very easy to switch your attachments between a grapple, a tree boom, a set of nursery forks once you're done with the auger. So I would say, the skid steer auger drive is, one of those good tools to have in your tool belt for sure.
So let's get into, because I wanted the bulk of this discussion to really kind of focus on helping customers figure out what the right auger setup for them is. So when it comes to picking an auger, right, we're typically looking at three main considerations, and that's soil type, the actual size or type of machine that you're going to be pairing it to, that's going to be carrying this tool. And then you've got kind of ways to spec it out with kind of accessories, if that's the right term, but like auger bits and extensions to kind of make sure that, you've got the tool itself, and then you kind of making sure that the tool is fitting the environment. So let's start with the soil. What do customers need to do to ensure that they're getting the right auger for the type of soil that they're going to be drilling into?
For sure. So the torque output of the auger drive is something that's going to come into play when you're talking about different soiling types. And if you have loose, sandy soil, you don't really need as much torque. So many times people will opt for a higher speed, lower torque setup in that environment. If you're dealing with more rocky conditions or compacted soils, having a higher torque drive with a slightly slower bit speed might be something you'd lean towards. We typically will ask, what the application is when we're pairing it. Are you looking at doing some pretty wide bits through difficult soil? Okay, then let's step up to a bigger displacement drive with a higher torque output. Or are you looking at just putting in a whole bunch of small holes to do a pretty long fence line? Okay, well, then you don't necessarily need a ton of torque to do a 6 or 9 inch auger bit. But if you're trying to put in a 30-inch diameter auger bit in the ground, that could take a ton of power, and we want to make sure that we match the auger drive to match the machine, the ground conditions, the auger bit, all three of those for sure.
Yeah, so take us through some of those specific soil conditions and tell us what auger or drive system or, and features kind of best match those conditions. Loose and sandy, clay and compact, rocky and mixed, frozen ground, shale, kind of what are we looking at in terms of the typical best loadout for those conditions?
So as far as trying to match up the right auger bits to the different ground conditions, starting at the bottom and working our way to the top there. For our entry level, loose sandy conditions or typical average user, we use a standard heavy duty auger bit, we call it. And that one's going to have just your standard bolt-in teeth on the flighting. And that's good for most ground conditions, works pretty well. Typically we'll see people in higher volume applications or rockier soil applications want to step up to our cast head bit. It's going to feature a more wear resistant head to it. And with that, we'll swap out those bolt-in style teeth for push-in style teeth that are much easier to replace. Think about a nut and a bolt holding a tooth to an auger bit that's going in and out of the ground a whole bunch of times. Over time, that can be a little tough to change out. The threads on those bolts can be a little bit troublesome. If this is something you're doing quite often, having those push-in style teeth are much easier to replace than a bolt-in style tooth. Also, having a more aggressive tooth helps out in those more rocky conditions and more compacted soil. So you'll see a little bit narrower teeth on there, a little bit more aggressive. Some people will opt for a carbide tooth on there as well to further improve your wear properties. So getting into that rocky soil. That's for somebody who's going to be using it more often, rockier soils, extreme conditions. The top of the line, the most extreme severe duty bit that we offer is our rock bit. And that's something that I always feel I need to explain a little bit when I'm talking to somebody about, because people think, oh, I need an auger bit for rocky soil, and that's what our cast head bit's for. But if you're going through pure rock, that's what our rock bit's designed for. Not rocky soil, not, I might see a rock every once in a while, but hey, I got solid slab I got to get through. And this has bullet teeth all over it. Looks like the teeth off of a cold planer. That one's got hard facing all over the edge of it. It's got extra thick flighting on it. So this one's really designed to work in those extreme rock conditions. And you really have to have the right tool carrier for it as well. In order to get those bullet teeth to work, you really need about 3,000 pounds of downforce to start fracturing that rock and getting that thing to really work. So if you got a lighter mini skid steer, mini excavator, or a smaller skid steer, the rock bit might be a difficult tool for you to work. That is something we always want to make sure we know what the application is. And hey, I'm selling you the auger drive, and whether you're getting the bits from me or somebody else, I want to make sure make sure that the whole system's going to work in the application you're working on, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I also wanted to give you kind of a chance. You've taken us through kind of some of the various bits that you guys kind of offers, but I also want to kind of allow you to go through you guys' lineup and the various kind of attachments and options that you guys offer on attachments that make sense in terms of the size and flow rates and everything for skid steers and CTL. So yeah, take us through the kind of various options that you guys have in terms of models. And also kind of another thing I'm kind of curious about is, how do you feel that Blue Diamond augers kind of stand out or differentiate from the rest of what's available on the market?
For sure. Thank you. So our auger drive lineup is pretty vast, pretty diverse. We do have some very entry-level models for low-powered machines all the way up to extremely high torque output applications, and trying to find out what the specific job is helps us to try and tailor that application. So starting at our entry-level Extreme Duty Series 2 auger drive range, we'd be talking about our EX1 and our EX2 drive motors. And these are for machines under 16 gallons a minute of flow, 8 to 11, 12 to 16. We try and find mini skid steers or older skid steers in those ranges. The idea is to try and match your flow range to the output of the auger to hit 60 RPMs, so you get an efficient drilling operation. So with that, the more flow you have, we'll go to a larger drive to not overspin that bit and make it ineffective, and kind of slow that bit down. So getting into our EX3 and EX4 drives, those are going to be more for your machines that are in that 15 to 20 gallon per minute range. Above and beyond that, we have our EX4 HF drive. And many people see that and think high flow, and it's not necessarily high flow, it's higher flow. And with that drive, we can run higher pressures, slightly higher flow ranges, and that one's going to have our best torque output and able to run on machines that have more than 33 hydraulic horsepower. So a combination of that flow and pressure. That drive's also going to include an integrated pressure relief valve. So in case you do get in a situation where you're overloading that auger and it catches something underground, you're not worried about blowing that motor out and having to fight with a warranty team or see what's going on there about fixing or replacing the auger drive. That's typically one of the most common calls we get, is somebody saying, I blew up my auger drive, I need a new one. Okay, well, what were you getting after? What happened? What were you doing? Okay, well, maybe you didn't have the right auger drive for the right application. Maybe the drive was lower quality components. Maybe there was just it just sheer worn out if somebody's really doing that kind of higher volume work. So with our full range of auger drives, we can pair them with mini skid steers. We'll walk behind units, full-size skid steers, or even mini excavators as well. And they all use a similar knuckle design to swap between the different mounts. So if you wanted to buy one drive and use it between all three different machines, we can definitely work with you that one as well. As far as the different bits to pair with those, I mentioned earlier, we have the heavy duty with cast, and then the rock bits. We also do have some other style bits that are getting more and more popular with landscapers, called tree bits. And these tree bits are a tapered bit that start out wide at the top and go to more narrow at the bottom. Typically 30-inch wide at the top, 15-inch wide at the bottom, for people who are dropping trees into holes and they want to have enough room for that root ball to fit in there, but they don't necessarily need the full cylinder hole all the way down. So having that tapered bit makes it a little bit more efficient of an operation and a little easier to kind of place that tree in the hole as well. So those tree bits are something we are seeing a little bit more demand for and more awareness in the market as well. It is a little bit more of a specialized auger bit. So the auger drives themselves, we do have a pretty wide range there. The auger bits we have a fair range of. The other thing that does come into play sometimes is people trying to swap back and forth between a hex drive and a round bit or vice versa. And we do have adapters to go back and forth between your 2-inch round, 2 and 9/16 round, and 2-inch hex shank drive. For us, what we see in the market, that 2-inch hex drive is the most popular. So that's typically what we'll stock and sell the most of. But if somebody has some older bits or different style bits, we do have ways of adapting between those. We do also have your auger extensions as well. So if somebody's got a specialty application where they need to get a little bit deeper, we do have those for them. But there's even a newer option we came out with recently is our telescoping auger mount. So you're able to get a little bit extra reach. So if you don't have an excavator and you're trying to get some hard to reach areas using your skid steer, you can get several more feet of reach with this telescoping auger drive. So a little bit more of a specialty application. Not something we see people looking for every day, but it is something that's nice to kind of expand that range of allowing you to do many jobs with your skid steer, as we're seeing more and more people in the marketplace demanding more of their skid steers for sure.
Yeah, man, that's awesome. Yeah, especially the telescoping option is, yeah, I can think of a few different applications where that would come in handy. Another part of the kind of like the calculus of all this and just kind of trying to figure this out, you've got your host machine's flow, you've got like a certain amount of torque that you're looking for to get through specific materials. And then there's, obviously like the actual speed of the auger and everything like that. How do you kind of recommend, between kind of like, okay, I got to make sure that, I've got enough flow or that I'm matching flow to my machine appropriately, but I also want a certain amount of torque, and maybe on certain jobs, I'm hoping that, to do them a little faster. How do you kind of recommend, torque is typically king, and so like how do you kind of recommend folks make sure that they're choosing the right auger with those three kind of things at war with one another?
That's something I wrestle with quite often. We have a lot of people calling in asking for inexpensive auger drives and trying to find the right tool for the job, and more often than not I'll lean towards the higher torque option, that higher flow rated option. At the end of the day, if you put not enough flow into a large auger drive with a high torque output, the worst thing that's going to happen is it's going to spin slowly. On the flip side, if you put too much flow and too much pressure to a small auger drive, you're going to have a bad day with a motor failure or a planetary gear failure or the hose or something leaking. So more often than not, I'll err on the side of caution of saying, hey, I know you have an older skid steer right now and you're getting this auger drive, but in 2, 3, 4 years from now, if you buy a bigger skid steer with more power, it'd be nice to have this drive that you can take with you and use on that machine as well. So the EX4HF auger drive, it's a little bit more money of a step up to get that higher volume motor and the pressure relief valve built into there. But it's one of those things, I'd rather spend a little bit more money up front, have something that's going to have more torque and more power when I need it to get the job done faster and be reliable. Because in this day and age, time is money. And if you're down and out and waiting on parts, you're losing out on the job, delaying the next job in your schedule. So that's one of the things we always recommend with customers. Try and buy something that's heavier duty than you think you may need, because when you get out in the field and you find some rocks in there, or when you find out, hey, I got to put some bigger footers in here, or hey, I need some bigger auger bits, put bigger fence posts for the corners than I really thought I needed. So I'd rather see somebody lean towards that bigger drive and bigger displacement. So it is something we got to do a little bit of education every now and again of saying, hey, what machine do you have now? What are you looking at buying? Let's double check your specs. What kind of pressure, what kind of flow are you putting out? And a lot of people don't realize how powerful their auxiliary system actually is. And there's quite a few powerful machines coming out in the market. Every year they get more and more powerful. So that's something we want to try and future-proof the attachment for sure.
Yeah, man, absolutely. And I think a similar question too would be on the bits. I mean, some of it just kind of some of these bits are very application focused, like you mentioned the tree bit, the rock bit. Is there any tendency that you kind of seen from customers to maybe try to just get the cheapest option? And similar, is there some education that you have to do there in terms of making sure that they're getting? What do you kind of try to, similar to like the torque is king discussion? Like what does that look like on the bit, making sure they're getting the right bit?
For sure. So all of the auger bits that the Blue Diamond offers are double-flighted auger bits. So there's 2 ribbons going up the shaft there to get the spoils out from the bottom of the hole. And that's something you see on some of the cheaper bits you may see online and other places of they're just a single flight bit, and that's going to just take longer to get the job done. They'll have less teeth on it, And we try and get good images of our bits on our website to people to actually see a little bit better of the thickness of the flighting. Is it just stitch weld all the way up, or is there a continuous weld holding things together? And that's one of the things being built in America here. Our attachments, we're held to a higher quality standard. Everything that leaves through our offices here goes through a very, very thorough quality check to make sure that there's no spotty welds, that there's no issues with missing teeth or anything before it leaves here, that when it shows up on the job site, it's ready to go. Sometimes people have a little bit of foresight and they'll order some extra teeth to go along with those bits because they know that the teeth are a wear item, that they are going to wear over time. So just like a spare tire in your car, I hope you never have to use it, but for most of us here, it's not a matter if, it's just a matter of when you're going to need it. So those replacement teeth in the bits, definitely something I always like to recommend people that, hey, get those up front, get a handful of those so you have them. So when those things start dulling up, replace them. A sharper knife or a sharper tooth helps the job get done much quicker, much more efficiently. And as I said before, time is money. So having the right tool for the right job helps save you a lot of time and frustration for sure.
Yeah, man. And when it comes to auger extensions, I mean, is it as simple as this thing needs to go a little bit deeper, or like what is kind of like the give us kind of like an education on kind of like when you need to consider an auger extension and and how to make the right investment.
For sure. So auger extensions, very simple, just like your normal socket extension. You use the ratchet of extending that to get a little bit more reach. Many times we'll see people that need those to hit harder to reach areas, or being able to get a little bit deeper. If the code in that area specs that you have to have post holes that are so deep, or your foundation pilings need to go so deep in the ground, that can help you get a little bit more reach. Our standard auger bit is 4 feet. So if you need to go 8 foot down, you'll need to add a 4 foot extension to that. We do offer a fixed extension, which just as it sounds is just a standard fixed extension. We also offer a variable extension, which I think is pretty neat. With those, there's holes drilled every foot. And it's pretty slick, actually, when you see it work. The auger extension can slide inside the auger bit. So as long as you're dealing with like a 9-inch auger bit or bigger, the tube that auger bit is built out of, your extension can actually slide inside of. So you can take this 4 foot extension and slide 2 feet into it, so you can get 6 foot of depth. And then once you get your depth and you need to reach more, you can loosen up that bolt, pull it back out, and get your extra 2 foot. So we offer, 2, 4, even 6 foot long auger extensions. So if somebody does need to get some extra depth out of there, it's a very good tool to have. A lot of times on skid steers, especially, you only have so much vertical range and reach. So having those variable extensions really help to get the bit started, get your hole down, and then if you have to adjust, you can adjust from there. I do give a little bit of caution with auger extensions. I've run into some ambitious end users in my time that want to use this to dig a well, it seems. I don't know why they're trying to go more than 20 or 30 feet down, but people want to daisy chain multiple auger extensions together. And I usually caution 1, maybe 2 auger extensions together. Past that, you do run into some issues with alignment, of being able to keep the whole chain in alignment. And most auger bit extensions aren't flighted as well. They're just a simple extension tube. So if you're trying to go 6, 8, 10 foot deep, you may have to bring your auger bit out of the hole and clean off the spoils and go back down for a second or third pass. So if you're trying to go much deeper than 10 foot or so, it can be a little bit cumbersome to keep raising that auger bit out of the hole to clean your spoils off. So that's one of those things with auger extensions. They give you a little bit extra room, but it's not going to replace a well digging machine that's going to actually have flighting all the way up and all the way through and screwed in extensions. Ours are simple hex attachment, just like off of the auger drive for the bit.